Hey everyone, welcome back to the class. This is our last session of the semester, and we've been building to this last topic, which is safe to say is the biggest in scope and in scale, which is the environmental topic, animals and ecology. Um, and specifically, we're talking about animals in the Anthropocene. So after this lecture, you'll know exactly what the Anthropocene is, the so-called Anthropocene. And how animals play a role in this geological term. So what I've done since last week, I gave you that week off. So we sort of skipped over the extinction studies stuff. Basically, I've interspersed some of that into this session, which makes sense because the sixth extinction that we've entered into definitely is part of this larger ecological topic that we're talking about. So we've been building up to this. The last two sessions we're going to build up to each other in some ways. So it's okay that we've condensed it. You may have less examples, but this felt more manageable. So without further ado, let's get to the topic. Animals in the Anthropocene. So let's get some jargon out of the way. Some disciplinary jargon that comes out of geology, but these terms travel through other discourses, including in art and philosophy. So the Holocene is a term that we want to know. It's a geological term. It's an epoch. An epoch is the smallest time scale in geology. And the Holocene began a little less than 12,000 years ago. And the Holocene is crucial for us as a species because basically all of the hominization of our species, of becoming human and developing civilizations as we have, it all happened within this time frame. So it's tiny within a geological sense because think about it, the Earth, this planet, which actually was two smaller planets that collided and fused into each other 4.4 billion years ago. That's billion years ago. And the universe is 13.7 billion years old. So as a scale, we are a blip in the chronology of existence. So it's very small in geological terms, but for us as everyday term, obviously, it's way bigger than the scale of a human life. So the Holocene is important because it was a moment, an epoch of relative climate stability. There's a real sweet spot that we need as a species or as life as we know it. There's a real sweet spot that only scientists have found other planets here and there that may have the same sweet spot. But as far as we know, this is the only place that's engendered life as we know life, organic life, in the sense that we have it. So it's really important and consequential that we have this period of relative stability. It's weird to think that maybe the course of this planet, it was slightly different, that we wouldn't have had this kind of climate and life would have never developed. How we would have access to a universe without life is a philosophical question that many people still grapple with. But that's for another time, another class. So the Holocene, very important. So for a long time, we've thought that we're in the Holocene, right? That we're continuing this epoch. But recently, somewhat recently, around 2000, there was a Dutch chemist, an atmospheric chemist, and his name is Paul J. Crutzen. And he was at a conference, and other people were giving papers and talking about the Holocene, and he seemed to be fed up in a way, and he just sort of claimed, I think just yelling out in some ways, like during the question period, he said, no, we're no longer in the Holocene, we're in the Anthropocene. And what he meant by this, anthro is man. This is where we get our term anthropology, the study of not man, but human. So what he meant is that we've entered an epoch, a geological epoch, where man is the driving factor, where humans are the driving factor. And that really for the first time in planetary history, human activity is on the scale of a geological force. So this is really consequential. And there are a number of ways in which scientists try to prove this, try to show this during the early 1700s, around 1610, when you had the genocide, the eradication of indigenous people in this country. A lot of agriculture went away because of this genocide, and scientists are able to go back and see in the carbon record that there was an incredible amount of carbon sequestration because there was all this rewilding happening because of this unfortunate, horrible moment in human history. So that might be an instance where human activity, in a sense, the New World coming and colonizing the New World, the Old World colonizing the New World, that had an impact on a global scale. But of course, there are other even more consequential candidates. So think of the Industrial Revolution, 18th and 19th century, and the beginnings of emitting carbon, first from coal and then from fossil fuels in the 20th century, and emitting these greenhouse gases that are in fact changing the temperature of the planet. And this had happened before, but through quote-unquote natural processes. With the Industrial Revolution, this is the first time where it's human activity that's leading to a planetary geological shift on a global scale. There are other competitors. Think of the atom bomb, the hydrogen bomb. We can now date things according to radioactivity. We've made a technology that can destroy all life as we know it, which is still unfortunately a threat with these smaller, more adept nuclear weapons that this country has and a number of other countries have. And so the threat of nuclear fallout is also an instance of humans almost creating their own meteor, right? You remember this meteor on the Yucatan that killed all the dinosaurs? We made a weapon that could effectively do the same thing, but it's coming from our own for our own volition and our own technology. So this is the basic premise behind the Anthropocene, that now all of a sudden humans are at the center of geological forces and are themselves major players in the structural evolution of this planet. There are a number of thinkers that have a problem with this term. This is why I said so-called Anthropocene at the beginning, because of course you and I, we're not the ones behind most of this. There are ways in which we contribute to greenhouse gases. There are ways in which we contribute to a number of things in our small individual lives, but it's not every human that's responsible for these kind of technologies and for pollution and for the emission of greenhouse gases. What we're talking about here is very large-scale corporations and states, countries, and more or less developed countries, right? It's almost crazy to say Anthropocene when there are certain, let's say, quote-unquote, less developed nations on this globe that really emit nothing, right? But they're paying more of a price than the developed countries that are emitting the bulk of emissions, and it's mainly China, the United States, and Europe. So the term Anthropocene may not, please just kind of be a little critical about it. It's an interesting term, but some people say actually we should call it the Capitalocene because it's capitalism that's led to this. There are other competing terms, Misanthropocene, Thessalocene. There are a number of different competing terms for this, but it's all the same premise that all of a sudden we're in a new geological epoch where human activity is having global impact. Okay, so that's all by way of definitional introduction, the Holocene moving into the Anthropocene. And this has led to, this is one of the big deleterious effects of anthropogenic climate change, and that's global warming. So hopefully you've studied a bit of climate science and you know a bit about climate politics. So this is all just going to be somewhat rudimentary. But basically scientists have been able to go back, even looking at ice cores in the Arctic and being able to, they dig down into the ice core and then they can almost tell the year it is from the accumulation of carbon, of fossil fuel, of greenhouse gases in the air as they have accumulated over time, almost like the rings of a tree in ice. And so this is a very famous graph now a very scary graph of this upward trend of yearly global temperatures. So the weather is not the climate. It might be weirdly cold right now for May. We have the polar vortex. That's not the climate. That's like local weather. What scientists are studying here in their complex climate models is the whole global climate, right? Not just localized areas. So that we, hopefully we'll never have senators again who in the Senate, like James Inhofe did, have a snowball and to try to disprove climate change. It's completely insane and ignorant. So climate is the overall planetary condition. When it comes to global warming, it has to do with average temperature, and so you see the upward trajectory here. And the reason this is a big issue is because of the greenhouse gas effect, which very briefly, the more greenhouse gases we have in our atmosphere, the more heat gets trapped from the sun. So this is the causal mechanism of global warming. The more carbon dioxide and methane, these are the two biggest, we emit up into the atmosphere, the more this heat gets trapped from the sun. And that nice sweet spot that we had with the Holocene is trending upwards perilously for most of life on Earth, especially human life. So that's just a basic understanding of climate politics and climate change and global warming. This is just primer. This is information everybody should really know. So the two biggest emitters are fossil fuel industries. This is the biggest emitter as far as the greenhouse gas effect, the chart. You might be surprised, but the second one is animal agriculture, large-scale industrial agriculture, and not only large-scale. It's the second biggest driver of global greenhouse emissions. It's more than that, though. So we'll be talking about this a little bit today. So it's the second global greenhouse gas emitter. This chart has it at 51%. That's a bit high, likely. It's probably more in the 20 to 30, something like that. It depends which study you look at. There was a famous study that came out with 51%. That was a bit high, and then it got revised downwards. But whatever the case might be, the greenhouse emissions from animal agriculture are more than all the cars, trains, airplanes, and so on and so forth on the road. So it's considerable. It's the second, which is one reason why minimizing animal products and maximizing plant-based products, and maybe actually going completely plant-based, is one of the best things that we can do as individuals when it comes to climate change. A small contribution, because we're only one person, but for us as individuals, it may very well be one of the biggest things we can do, along with traveling less and a number of other things. But diet is quite huge. So you see water use is big. 1 hamburger equals 2 months of showers. Waste is quite incredible. We have way more bovines. We have way more cows in existence than human beings. Some 52 billion land animals are killed a year. That's way more earthlings than humans. So it's a massive industry that's largely unseen. Desertification, ocean acidification, species extinction, it's the number one driver, and deforestation. Some 90% of the Amazon deforestation is due to either grazing cattle or producing soy that doesn't go to humans but is fed to that cattle, right? And the more deforestation you have in the Amazon, the less carbon is sequestered in all that beautiful, lush vegetation, and all these ecosystems are being destroyed. So it's a massive problem. Animal agriculture, along with fossil fuels, are an environmental disaster. They really are. And we haven't even talked about the ethical side of all this, right? Which we've touched about in other classes. So here we're only talking about ecological politics, the political economy of climate change. Animal agriculture is substantial. So if you're interested in learning more about this, more into specifics, in a somewhat entertaining way. This chart comes from Cowspiracy. It was a documentary that came out a few years ago. I think it's still on Netflix. It's entertaining. It is trying to entertain you, so it's not rigorously scientific, but it is vetted. They do give you all the studies, and they're non-industry funded studies. So there is good information in this documentary about animal agriculture and the environment. So I highly recommend. I think everybody should see it. It's pretty good. So, what does this all have to do with art, right? I'm giving you quite a bit as an introduction of all these issues and terms in ecological politics. What have artists done here? Well, they've done a lot. I could give a whole class, and I'd like to actually, just a whole semester, one class just on ecological practices of art, of artists and activists, because there have been a lot since the 1960s, but definitely in the past 2 decades and recently. So I'm going to show you a number of different examples of, actually a lot of this is very recent art, very contemporary, that will tie into these issues. So it'll answer the question, what have artists been doing with these really large scale ecological questions? Some of this will be depressing. I'll be honest with you, I study this. This is one of my areas of specialties, and it's just, sometimes I have to take a break from it because it's so overwhelming, how dire everything feels. So some of this work is going to be challenging in that sense emotionally, but some of it can also be kind of funny and instigative, and maybe a bit cheeky. So there might be a nice mix. This work by Superflex, they're a Danish collective. They're very good. This is their flooded McDonald's from 2009. It's a video that they did, a video work. They recreated the inside of McDonald's to scale. It looks exactly like what I remember a McDonald's to look like. And they very slowly flooded it. So it's a video, it's a long video. I don't have the video for you. It would be way too long. I can't even find it. But it's the store just slowly rising in the water level. And that's the course of the video. It's like a durational work using water. So I do have a nice clip that shows you certain sequences of it. And one of the members of Superflex, this artist collective, he talks about this work as he's showing it to you, as it's on screen. So I'm going to go ahead and play it for you.
We have the start scene where we are introduced to a McDonald's restaurant, where you see the interior, you see some of the food products like soda, burger, fries, and beautifully close-up images of that. So it's an introduction to the context, which is a McDonald's restaurant.
McDonald's is kind of the biggest fast food chain in the world, and it's a very iconic one. And also, it's if you close your eyes and you think about a fast food chain, I think in most people's brains, the image of a McDonald's will come up. But I think the starting point is more to focus on the idea of this mass production of food.
What's happening now is that we see water sort of coming in under a door very slowly, in a very mild way, and slowly sort of water sort of filling up the McDonald's restaurant. Not in a dramatic way, but it's kind of slowly coming in. And the image shifts. You see that it's sort of spreading through the restaurant. It's the paper on the floor is starting to move, and now it's sort of covering all the floor, and it will slowly sort of raise. But of course, when you do something like this, you don't exactly know what happens, but still I would have to admit that most of what you see is also planned. Like every shot is scripted. You can't control the water, of course, and now I can see Ronald is starting to move. That was a little bit scary, actually, because it wasn't planned. Suddenly he's floating around, but he's not falling, and everybody thought it was kind of ghostly. Is Ronald sort of angry, or is it some kind of omen that we shouldn't do the film or something? But I would also say maybe that we shot this film around 2007, 2008, when there was a lot of sort of apocalyptic scenarios sort of going on. The financial crisis had happened, and there was all this sort of the end of the world rhetoric, and global warming was really kicking in. Hollywood was making films about all of this. So we, I guess, wanted to make our version of it, which is, I guess, apocalyptic as well, but in a very sort of mild Scandinavian way. But still using sort of the, I guess, some kind of global vocabulary, the raising of the water, the most famous fast food chain. So it's very heavy in symbolics, almost sort of unbearably sort of Catholic punk. But it has this sort of humorous elements that, you know, are kind of slapstick as well. It's quite some years since I've looked at it, so it's kind of funny to see now. But it has different elements, I would say.
Every time I show this clip and the Ronald McDonald starts moving, the whole class starts laughing. It's a nice moment. And we often have, I think every time I've shown this clip, I have really fantastic conversations, a discussion over what it means, because there's something very, it's very simple, straightforward. It's not hitting you over the head in any way. He even says, like, the water is coming in gently. So there are all sorts of different readings you could have about this work that could be rich, and maybe even in your responses, you could choose this work or another work to sort of talk about a little bit as an aside. But one of the most obvious ways is just almost this return of the repressed, right? So either water use when it comes to raising the animals that are used for global fast food, and of course McDonald's is huge, or simply the greenhouse gases that come from large-scale animal agriculture that will lead to global warming, a more greenhouse effect, and then rising water. So there's some way in which, like, this very safe, sort of mundane space, prefabricated space of the McDonald's restaurant is becoming is like being infiltrated by the outside. Like you can't keep the experiences separate anymore. So I've had a lot of students take that route, and as far as an interpretation, it's an interesting one. Of course, there are others. We don't have time to go into some of the other interpretations, but it is in some ways a kind of a lovely open-ended work. So a little more clear-cut, less, I say, poetic, although they're also quite beautiful, are these large-scale photographs by Mishka Henner. They're drone photography. They're really up high, almost like satellite photography. That's how high you are here. So it's a massive scale. And at first you can't quite tell what it is. You think, well, okay, it does seem like a landscape of some kind. Maybe at first you don't know that this is bird's eye view, but it's bird's eye view. And at first you see, like, very beautiful colors. Like these are quite beautiful photographs. It's not until you look at the title, Feed Yard, and you know the title of this series, because there are a number of these. I only show you two, I think. These are part of a series of feedlots. So places in which cattle are raised, are kept, are basically fattened up, and then sent to slaughter. And these line the American landscape, along with concentrating feeding operations, factory farms, and they go up and down the middle part, mainly the middle part of the United States. So at first he went to Texas to try to find oil fields. He wanted to do a series that were oil fields from bird's eye view. But then he started seeing all of these, and he was mesmerized by them, but also kind of horrified. So here's a detail of this one. So this is like you're zooming in. So all these little dots, these are all cows. And if you've ever been to a farm, or I've been to animal sanctuaries, there are wonderful animal sanctuaries in upstate New York once everything opens up. If you ever want to do a day trip and go meet some animals that are living out the rest of their lives in a sanctuary, it's really quite wonderful. You can go see one in person. They are very large animals, gentle, sweet, and large. So all these dots, they look like little ants. These are all cows. And so that gives you a sense of scale of this pollution that's off on the right part of this sort of topographical landscape. You get a sense of what you're seeing. Here's another one, which is maybe less beautiful because this pool, this like lake of probably manure and blood and chemicals, it looks like there's an open wound on the surface of the earth, right? But there's still something formally compelling. There's still something kind of beautiful about this photograph. And again, all of these little dots, these are all individuals. They're all individual creatures. These are all cows in feedlots. So there are a number of interesting things about Mishka Henner's work. One is that it's actually illegal to take photographs of these sites. In the mid 2000s, there was a law that was passed, the Animal Terrorism Enterprise Act. And if you watch that documentary Animal People that I suggested on Netflix, this goes into that history. But basically, you can be tried as a terrorist if you in any way impeded with this large-scale animal industry. And so merely taking photographs could get you in trouble. Now he gets out of this by being so aerial, right? So who knows what the law is when it comes to such a aerial shot. He's not like broken in. He's not gone close to take photographs. So it's an interesting way in which, as an artistic practice, this might get around those laws. But whatever the case might be, it does show you the scale of these industries and also the resulting pollution. I mean, just think about it. These are large animals. They're killed by the billions. That blood is useless. It's called offal. Where does all that blood go? They're having a really hard time. It sort of gets buried underground somewhere, and then it goes into the water table. It goes into the rivers. It pollutes people's waters. These places, just like concentrated feeding operations, factory farms, they're usually in the poorest communities. They're in the most precarious human communities. People get sick. They pollute the geography. So these are, in some sense, like a real blight to the landscape, and not only for the ecosystem of non-humans, but also for humans who live nearby. So there's a lot to talk about with these photographs. And here is this is not a work of art, but I did want to show you this because this is a map of the pollution that all meets into the Mississippi River. And it's the Missouri. I think, is that the Missouri? No, can't remember which river that is. But anyways, all the rivers meet in this large Mississippi, and everything ends up in the Gulf of Mexico. And this spot right here, this thermal indication that you're seeing here, this is the largest dead zone in the world now. So a dead zone is a place that's so polluted that nothing can grow, nothing can live, either vegetable or animal, plant or animal. So we have a massive, massive dead zone at the bottom of the country. Not only, but largely because of large-scale animal operations that line the middle part of the United States. So it's a very, very large scale. We can push back even more, and now we go to Latin America, and this was in the news not too long ago. You might remember these horrible fires. I mean, there are always fires, but there are these horrible fires that happened in the Amazon, especially in the Brazilian Amazon. So this is a photograph from space of all these fires that were happening at that time. An acceleration of deforestation, especially under the new right-wing president, Bolsonaro in Brazil. And most of this deforestation, this is where we get back to our post-colonial lecture from 2 weeks ago, not only harms the ecosystems, all the rich species that live there, and there's like no place on Earth where there are more species per area density than in the Brazilian Amazon. But it also displaces, and in some cases, like they get assassinated, they get murdered, either activists that are working down there or the indigenous community that live in the Brazilian Amazon. So this is not only, just like the American Midwest, this is not only a question of the exploitation of animals, it's also concomitant a question about the exploitation of precarious human communities that live and depend on these ecosystems and these geographies. So this is a huge problem. And like I was saying before, most of the deforestation, most of the devastation of the Amazon is due to either grazing or growing soy crop, monocrops, to then feed to then feed the herds, the cattle. So it's a major problem. So we're kind of seeing the picture from both North and South America, although these aren't the only places, right? Okay, so that was a lot of the sort of big, that would be the biggest picture stuff, right? This is planetary climate crisis, global warming, greenhouse emission stuff. And I think I forgot to say, the biggest source of methane as a greenhouse gas comes from cattle. And they don't fart. I know a lot of people joke and say that the methane is from cow farts, but it's actually from burping, from belching. It's much more from that. So methane is a really powerful greenhouse gas, and it's largely from these large-scale animal industries. So that's the big picture. But now I think we want to talk a little bit about extinction studies and this awareness that we're now in the sixth mass extinction, which is related to what we've just been talking about. So there have been 5 mass extinctions in this planet's history. One of the most famous one would be the one of the dinosaurs with that meteor that hits the Yucatan Peninsula. This is the 6th one. And since this is the Anthropocene, this 6th one is the first one that is because of human activity. All the other extinctions were quote-unquote natural events, right? But this is actually because of human activity, including this kind of stuff, right? And so there are a lot of scholars that are studying extinction. If you want to read probably one of the best books about the 6th extinction is by Elizabeth Colbert. It's just called The 6th Extinction. It was a very popular book. It's very, very good. It's really, really good. So that could be some summer reading. Not fun summer reading, but informative and the kind of stuff everybody needs to know kind of reading. And there have been artists that work on this question. So Ravi Agarwal is one of these artists, and he did a book called In the Shadow of the Vulture from 2018. And like a lot of scholars, there's a sub-discipline, or maybe it's its own discipline within animal studies, multi-species studies, or extinction studies, which studies the ways in which all different species interact with each other, because we're not independent. Like this large structural ecosystem that every creature lives in, and they study how they relate to each other and how these relations can get messed up or thrown off track. In some ways, in sometimes very, very complicated sort of global ways. It's almost kind of like detective work. So Ravi Agarwal did this book called In the Shadow of the Vulture. He's an artist, but he's interested in these environmental issues. And it's basically a study of vultures in India, who historically have been very, very important. Vultures are carrion eaters, though they eat dead flesh. And they're crucial for the ecosystem. Both for New World vultures and Old World vultures like those in India, they're crucial for the ecosystem. So for a long time, there was something of an equilibrium between humans that lived in India, domesticated cows, which in India are for the most part sacred. They're not killed to be eaten, but they do live as part of the community. There are images in India where cows are just walking down the street. They will be used for work. They will be used for milk. Once they die, their skin might be used for leather, but otherwise their body is almost ritualistically sent back to nature. And so you'll have like spaces outside the city where dead cow bodies will be sent to, and that's where the vultures come in. The vultures will be part of this ecosystem that sort of takes care of the carcasses, and in some ways, you can almost think in like a spiritual or animist way, making like renewing life with dead material, right? This sort of idealistic sort of understanding of ecosystems. And so there was a balance of this for a long time until the 1970s and 1980s, where vulture populations started to die off, and this equilibrium, or this multi-species being together of human, cow, and vulture, and it would be, of course, more than just these three, the vultures started to depopulate. And they figured out why. They started in the 70s and 80s, and even more so in the 90s and onwards, giving cows an anti-inflammatory medication that had been developed. So they're given a drug, which makes them able to live longer. It's anti-inflammation for the joints, so they're able to work longer. They're able to be part of the community longer, basically, whether for work or whatever it might be. But then, of course, they die, and then they're sent off to be, quote-unquote, recycled by the vultures on the outskirts of town. But, of course, that drug is still in their body, and that drug is a deadly toxin to vultures. And so vultures have started dying, and now in many cases, like, they become endangered. So here we have the study of a whole network of things and of beings: humans, cows, vultures, anti-inflammatory drugs. They've all sort of created a new network, one that's not necessarily good for all the species within that network. So it's a fascinating work. And there's a photographer who worked for National Geographic, really beautiful photographs, Charlie Hamilton James. He had a whole series of vultures, and this is actually in Africa, where they're also endangered. So I urge you, if you're interested in these images, there are a bunch of them online from National Geographic. You can look them up. It's a pretty well-known series that he did, and I do have a video of him talking about this series. So while we're still on vultures, why don't we watch this short clip?
They are disgustingly ugly. They are the ultimate anti-hero. And something about that draws me to them in some sort of weird, morbid fascination. And actually, as I got to know them and started researching them and started to understand them more, I discovered that they are, of all the animals in the world, the ones that are possibly in the most trouble. You get this sort of frenzied moment with vultures when they start feeding. What I wanted to do was actually get into the carcass and see the birds interact with each other inside a carcass. The vultures, they're too smart. They could see my camera a mile away. Then I discovered, okay, if I get it right inside the carcass, they didn't really notice the camera anymore. The image we got from it took 3 weeks, and we only really got one out of probably 50,000. We look at vultures with a whole set of preconceptions. What I had to do is think of ways of presenting vultures to the world. They're the fastest declining birds in history. They're the fastest declining family of species in the world at the moment. Africa is now in freefall decline, but this is all direct poisoning in Africa. When you think of the ecosystem of South Africa, elephants, lions, hyenas, leopards, vultures are actually more key to that than most. They consume more meat than all the other scavengers and predators put together. Imagine you took that out of the equation. You're going to throw that whole ecosystem completely out of balance. What really saddens me is that even with us creating the biggest exposure of the vulture crisis ever done, I still don't actually think anything will happen fast enough to stop, the decline. They are wonderful creatures, and we are killing them at such an extraordinary rate. They're probably going to be extinct within 5-10 years. To cover the story properly, I had to get shots in the bushmeat markets. Vulture brains and vulture parts are wanted in the witch doctor trade because they believe it gives them the ability to see into the future. And it was staggering, the amount of dead wildlife there. There were leopards, lions, bits of elephant, black mambas, honey badgers, pangolins, the most trafficked animal in the world at the moment. You could just walk in off the street and buy any of that. So I had to shoot them. I want people to see them at their best, which is when they're fighting, they're covered in blood, and they're utterly repulsive, because that's how they are, and they're wonderful for it. But also I want people to see them when they're at their worst, which is their head sliced open, their brains. So people have got to see that, otherwise they're not going to get it. And that's, I guess, the point.
So that's now even more timely because he mentions the pangolins and bushmeat trade, and if we were in class together, we would have a pretty amazing discussion coming off of the post-colonial session with these more local questions about local traditions and local trade, how there may not be a post-colonial solution, arguably. So we would have to have an interesting conversation about that. But it's even more timely now, this clip, because he mentions these bush trade markets. He mentions pangolins, the most trafficked animal in the world, and pangolins may very well have played a role in COVID-19, along with bats, right? So there are so many good pieces of writing recently about zoonotic diseases. And the role using animals, domesticating animals, or using wild animals and trafficking in them leads to serious problems and serious pandemics. And this was not the first one. But I always stress this, and it's very important. If you ever read something about COVID-19 and animals and trafficking and the coronavirus, and it doesn't give you the bigger picture that all these major pandemics we've had, including the Spanish flu of 1918, which probably came from pigs, if I remember correctly, pigs, or swine flu, which comes from pigs, or bird flu, which comes from intensive chicken farming. If it doesn't give you this larger picture that almost all forms of intensive domestication and the use of animals leads to viral problems, then you're not getting the picture. And the worst case scenario is that you're getting something like kind of ethnocentric and maybe even racist. Like it's the people over there that do crazy things with animals, but here what we do is normal, right? I think that's completely misguided. The whole thing, the whole apparatus of using animals in this way leads to problems of human health, of everybody, of all cultures, right? So it's very important to keep that bigger picture in mind. So this clip that I showed you in this concentration, we're talking about vultures as a specific case in point, actually opens up now. It feels much more timely, unfortunately, with what we're living through in this pandemic. So a few more. I think we're nearing sort of the end of the class, but I do want to show you a few more. So this is Nick Brandt, who does these really incredible photographs. I highly encourage you to just go to his website. He has an incredible website where he has all his series, very high resolution. You can go in and look at all his images. This is his most recent series called This Empty World from 2018. And it's a series of really shockingly beautiful, but also a bit disturbing and jarring photographs, which will involve a wild animal. So in this case, you have an elephant. Here's another one where you have a gazelle. They're incredible images. And here you have a lion. And if you know Jeff Wall within the history of photography, he's one of the first to start working with staged photographs. So these are actually all staged. You're seeing two images superimposed into one. So what he does is he went to, this is in Kenya, and he worked with the Maasai community in Kenya, near the Amboseli National Park. And he would set up a set to look like something. So in this case, it looks like this really horrible post-apocalyptic coal burning place, right, where the water is all polluted. There's the landscape is sort of charred and smoke is coming up from the landscape. So he'd set up this set, right, and then he would wait, and he would wait for the wildlife that actually lives near this national park, to start wandering and sort of looking and inspecting the set. And sometimes this would take weeks, months. So this represents a moment where this gray elephant, African gray elephant, has come to the set to start, to check it out. Then he will stage another photograph with people that live there, with the human communities that live there. So they almost become actors within his photographs. And it'll be a different time, 2 different times, but the same camera angle, right? So you're seeing 2 photographs, 2 different times, but from the same part of the set. And that's the same with all of these. So here is the gazelle on the roundabout, and then here is this sort of gas station, petrol station that he set up, and this lion must have come to check things out. And so this is as far away from nature photography as you can get. And there's a rich reading that we give to this work. The sense in which human activity has reached everywhere, including where lions live, including where gazelles live, and where African gray elephants live. So it's more than likely commenting on human expansion, on industry, and growth, right? As this impediment or as this encroachment, and more than likely a contributor to endangering species, and even species extinction. So they're dark photographs. They're also quite arresting. They're pretty beautiful. So I recommend going to his website and checking out the other series. Here's Superflex again, who did their own work that have to do with endangered species and extinction. This is a really pretty wild work. So what they did is they gathered on the date of important international climate panels. One happened in 2012 in Dhaka. Another one happened in Rio in 2015. There's one happening soon this year in Denmark. Hopefully they're going to get their act together and we'll actually have serious resolutions for mitigating climate disaster. There's another one in 2025 in Greenland, and then there's one in 2050. And these are more than posters. So for each one of these climate panels, they would get people together, they get participants, and they would hypnotize them to experience the world as that animal. So experience climate change as an eagle. Now, I have no idea. These can't be recorded. I haven't really read any sort of summaries of how these hypnosis group sessions go, whether they're successful, whether you actually do somehow get hypnotized to feel like you're an eagle. But I think that's probably beside the point. There's a way in which entering into hypnosis is this gesture of empathy, to experience the world not as a human, but as an eagle. And each animal is very specific for climate change. Like they've chosen these specifically for these climate change panels because eagles, it's well known that their habitats, especially the time of nesting and egg hatching, has become perilous because of climate change and the change in the seasons. So the eagle is an animal that's having a hard time with global warming and climate change. The jellyfish, on the other hand, they're proliferating. They love it. They're fine with acidified oceans, and they're fine with warmer waters. So jellyfish populations are exploding. Polar bears are not. You may remember last year there's I don't show it to you because it's really grotesque, but this image of a morbid, starving polar bear, just like skin and bones. Certainly was about to die. Polar bears are having a very, very hard time, both because their natural, the ecosystem of predator and prey has been disrupted, but also their habitat is melting and receding. Right, so there's the polar bear is not a coincidence. The fourth one is a mosquito. Mosquitoes are doing really, really well in climate change, and they're increasing their ability because of the warm weather and the higher populations. More and more infectious diseases are being spread because of mosquito populations. And you might be surprised by this, But do you know who our apex predator is for human beings? What animal has killed the most human beings in human history? It's the mosquito. It's quite crazy to think about, but the apex predator for human beings is the mosquito because of its ability to spread diseases. And then the last one, in far off in 2050, I think this is a dark poetic gesture, but they chose an animal that's already extinct, which is the woolly mammoth. Though, when we talked about bioart, there are some scientists trying to resurrect using gene technology to regenesis this animal. So who knows? Maybe we'll see a mammoth in our lifetime, which would feel kind of perverse, but hey. Okay, and let's finish. We have a couple more. So I wanted to show you this video essay for a movie that maybe you've seen, Life of Pi. And it's a really interesting discussion of animals extinction, endangered animals and species extinction, and the history of film. It's really quite good, so I wanted to show it to you. And it's very obvious why I'm showing it to you. It's coming off of the heels of what we've been talking about in a more or less perfect way. So take a look.
For most of us, our first encounter with a wild animal happens through a screen. The camera has the power to bring us closer to an animal than we are ever likely to get in the wild. It is by sight that we become fascinated with them. By sight that we come to know them. By sight that we mourn their disappearance. We are currently living through the world's 6th mass extinction event, the first to be caused entirely by humans. By the century's end, we are likely to have lost half of the world's species. Film will not only be the most intimate encounter we have with animals, for most species, it will be the only encounter possible. The fewer animals we find in the wild, the more we see on screen. The digital revolution has enabled filmmakers to create an entirely new breed of animal, absence of flesh and blood, answered by an abundance of virtual animals. Animals have always been a central part of filmmaking, and animals on the screen have always had a complex relationship to their real-life counterparts. One of the earliest films made by Thomas Edison is of an animal execution. In 1903, the rogue performing elephant, Topsy, was sentenced to death by electrocution after killing her trainer. Edison used the event as an opportunity to show off the power of alternating current, as well as his state-of-the-art film camera. Thousands watched the event, and many thousands more flocked to the film. The celluloid used in film stock comes from gelatin made from the rendered bodies of animals. Eastman Kodak had its own rendering plant so that they could monitor the quality of the animal product that went into the patented celluloid used by most filmmakers. Before digital, when you watched a film, the image on the screen was literally being projected through animal matter. With digital, we usher in a new era in which animals might play a different role on the screen. For Darren Aronofsky's animal epic Noah, Industrial Light and Magic created 14,000 virtual animals, none of which involve the use of live animals in their creation. Aronofsky felt it would be against the theme of the film to put live animals in dangerous or harmful filming conditions. The result is the most breathtaking collection of virtual animals ever assembled. The film itself is a kind of digital ark, bringing thousands of animals to life, even while their real-life counterparts are likely to become extinct in the coming decades. Before Noah, CGI artists more often used live animals on the set to serve as models for digital versions. The process is called capturing. In the filming of Ang Lee's Life of Pi, 4 tigers were used to create the unforgettable feline presence of Richard Parker. One of them was reported to have nearly drowned on the set.
No! What are you thinking? Are you out of your mind? Who gave you the permission to come back here?
I just wanted to say hello to him.
You think that tiger is your friend? He is an animal, not a playmate.
Animals have souls. I have seen it in their eyes.
We know animals by sight. By seeing, we know they have souls. Somehow, these souls survive even in their visual avatars, even when what we are watching is not an animal at all, but a collection of pixels on a screen.
So that both works well with the discussion of the extinction study that we've been having in the second half of class. It's a depressing video. I'm sitting back here, starting to get depressed myself. But it's very good. In some ways, it takes us full circle to the first class when we talked about Berger, so the disappearance of animals, and then they're coming back in a different way. In this case, not stuffed toys and visual culture, but in CGI. And of course, this also works well with your final projects, which are going to be about one of those films that hopefully you would choose and enjoy and write a short little response about. So I thought that worked well. And then we'll end on this work by Alexis Rockman, who actually was an artist that the director of Life of Pi saw, and he was inspired. He said, "Can you be my artistic director for the Life of Pi?" So this painter, well-known, it's almost like diorama natural history painting, but really gone wrong. He was the artistic director for Life of Pi. And Alexis Rockman, he has a number of really wonderful paintings. You just go to his website and check out these. They're very large. I've seen them in person. There are these crazy post-apocalyptic, out in the future type paintings where bizarre things happen. In some cases, there are species that are endangered or extinct. Notice all the jellyfish having a great time. Notice the shopping cart here. It's a vision of the world once everything's gone horribly wrong. Sort of this dystopian natural history painting. So check out his paintings if you can. But I think that's probably enough for this class. And it's our last class, so I hope everybody enjoyed the class. It was a little difficult. This course is my baby, so I really wanted it would be much better in some ways in person, to have conversations, to go to lots of different places, because it's all so much from scratch. But I hope it still worked out, and that the sequence made sense, and I hope you got something out of it over the course of us going remotely, and over the course of the whole semester. So I hope it got you thinking on multiple fronts about the importance of animals in culture, history, politics, and the climate, and everything else. So everybody stay well. I'm looking forward to reading these responses and to reading your the responses for the final projects. Remember, those final projects are smaller, they're more chill. Just email me if you have any questions about it. It should just be kind of a fun final thing to do, watch a movie, and then lend me your thoughts about it. Otherwise, take care, everybody.